I want to start today by putting you, the listener, into a very specific, a very relentless scenario.
Okay.
Think about the basic routines that structure your week. Maybe you go to the gym, maybe you have a standing meeting on Tuesdays or...
Doing groceries on a Sunday morning.
Right, exactly, the standard lifestyle things.
Yeah.
Now, I want you to imagine a routine that isn't optional, like at all.
Right.
It's not a lifestyle choice. If you miss this routine, your body will literally begin to shut down from the inside out.
It's a heavy thought.
It really is. To fulfill this routine, you have to leave your house, travel to a highly specific clinical location, sit in a specialized chair, and allow a machine to be connected to your bloodstream for like 3 to 4 hours.
Wow.
Yeah. You cannot do this from your couch. You can't just hop on a telehealth call. You must physically be there.
Right.
And you must do this 3 to 4 times a week, every single week, for the remainder of your life.
The psychological and logistical weight of that scenario is just, it's difficult for most of us to genuinely internalize, I think.
Oh, absolutely.
You are describing a life tethered to a machine. I mean, it dictates where you can live, how far you can travel, and what your entire weekly schedule must revolve around.
It is an absolute non-negotiable anchor. And the sobering reality is that for an estimated 2.75 to 3 lakh Indians currently living with end-stage renal disease.
Or ESRD.
Right, ESRD. This isn't some abstract thought experiment for them. This is their Tuesday and their Thursday
It's hard.
and their Saturday.
Yeah.
Because their kidneys have failed, they rely entirely on the absolute necessity of dialysis to filter the lethal toxins from their blood.
It's life or death, quite literally.
Exactly. So today we are pointing our deep dive directly at a company that has built a sprawling, highly engineered empire right at the center of this immense human vulnerability.
Right.
We are exploring the inner workings of Nephrocare Health Services Limited.
Though, in the broader healthcare ecosystem, you will almost exclusively hear them referred to by their operational brand name, which is NephroPlus.
Yeah, NephroPlus. We will stick with NephroPlus today. Just to frame the sheer scale of what we're dealing with here, we are looking at the largest dialysis network in Asia.
That's right.
According to the most recent data from September 2025, they are actively operating 519 clinics.
It's massive.
And while their foundation is Indian, they have aggressively pushed their borders out to include Nepal, the Philippines, and Uzbekistan.
Our mission for this deep dive goes far beyond just profiling a successful medical company.
Right.
What's fascinating here is the operational puzzle they have solved. We are going to dissect the mechanics of how an organization takes a highly complex, high-risk, life-sustaining medical procedure and scales it across markets that are notoriously chaotic and well-fragmented.
Because capturing a small slice of a market is one thing, but the sources we are looking at today indicate that NephroPlus has managed to capture roughly 50% of the entire organized dialysis market in India.
Which is staggering.
It really is. How does a single entity achieve that? We want to uncover how they transformed a severe, chronic healthcare bottleneck into an operational masterclass.
Yeah.
We are talking about a company that has to simultaneously navigate sluggish government bureaucracies, the cutthroat politics of major corporate hospital chains.
And the dizzying complexities of cross-border acquisition.
Exactly, all at once.
The answer really lies in their transition from being merely a healthcare provider to becoming essentially a systems engineering company.
Okay, a systems engineering company. Unpack that a bit.
Well, they haven't just poured concrete and bought medical equipment for 519 locations. They have engineered a proprietary system designed to enforce absolute standardization.
Right.
The underlying challenge they face every day is ensuring that the clinical outcome, the safety, the efficacy, the infection control is identical whether the patient is sitting in a premium ultramodern hospital in Mumbai or a standalone cinder block clinic in a remote Tier 3 city.
Right. Okay, let's unpack this by mapping out the terrain first. To understand the business model, we have to look at the actual landscape of the disease they are fighting.
Yeah, the market size.
Because we are effectively dealing with an invisible epidemic. The raw demand for this service is staggering.
The data regarding chronic kidney disease in India paints a very grim picture. When analysts calculate the total addressable market, the TAM for dialysis services in India, the current estimates sit between 25,000 to 35,000 crore rupees annually.
Wow, 35,000 crore rupees. I always find broad revenue estimates a bit abstract, so let's translate that figure into actual human logistics.
Yeah.
You brought the raw data on the session volume, How does the math actually break down on a daily basis?
Let's look at the baseline population. We have those 2.75 to 3 lakh patients suffering from end-stage renal failure. Because their biological kidneys are functioning at less than 15% capacity, they require artificial filtration. Standard nephrology protocols mandate that to avoid fatal uremia, these patients require dialysis 3 to 4 times a week.
Okay, so if a single patient needs, let's say, 150 to 200 sessions over the course of a 52-week year.
Exactly. You multiply that by 3 lakh patients.
Oh.
And you arrive at a staggering requirement of 41 to 60 crore individual dialysis sessions per year across the country.
60 crore.
Yeah, that is the baseline volume necessary just to keep the current patient population alive.
60 crore sessions a year. Just the needle inventory alone for 60 crore sessions is a logistical mountain. But what concerns me more is the trajectory. Like, why is this baseline so incredibly high? Is this simply a byproduct of India having a massive population?
Population size is a factor, sure, but the true accelerators are deep structural demographic shifts. We are looking at a convergence of chronic lifestyle diseases.
Like diabetes.
Diabetes and hypertension are the primary culprits here. The medical consensus is that together, these two conditions are responsible for 50 to 60% of all chronic kidney disease cases.
And the prevalence of those two conditions in the Indian adult population is practically a crisis of its own.
The sources indicate that currently, 10 to 15% of the adult population in India is dealing with diabetes or hypertension. You have tens of millions of adults who are currently walking around with the precursor conditions that, if poorly managed, inevitably lead to renal degradation.
So the pipeline of future ESRD patients is completely saturated. We aren't looking at a disease that has been cured or contained. The market demand is basically guaranteed to grow.
The clinical data absolutely supports that bleak forecast. The incidence of end-stage renal disease is actively adding about 1 lakh brand new patients to the pool every single year.
1 lakh new patients a year.
Yeah. The total patient base is compounding at an annual rate of 8 to 10%. When you layer that on top of India's rapidly aging demographic, we are looking at the population over the age of 65 doubling to reach 20 crore people by the year 2050. The structural tailwinds for the dialysis industry are virtually unstoppable.
You hear those figures. A 35,000 crore market, 60 crore required sessions, a compounding patient base, and the logical assumption is that the biggest healthcare conglomerates on the subcontinent must be fighting a massive turf war over this sector.
Right, you'd think so.
You'd assume the market is hypersaturated with massive, organized corporate players.
The reality on the ground contradicts that assumption entirely. This is one of the most critical insights from our research.
Okay.
Despite the sheer scale of the capital flowing through this necessity, the penetration of organized healthcare providers is remarkably low. The data shows that only 15 to 25% of the dialysis market in India is being served by organized networks.
Wait, only 25% on the high end. That leaves a massive void. If the organized sector only holds 25%, that means a staggering 75 to 85% of this 35,000 crore market is completely unorganized.
Exactly.
And in healthcare, unorganized is a terrifying word. We aren't talking about unorganized retail here.
No, we are talking about severe market fragmentation. The vast majority of this demand is either going entirely unmet, meaning patients in rural areas simply deteriorate and pass away.
Which is tragic.
Or it is being absorbed by thousands of isolated, standalone, mom-and-pop independent centers.
And I want to paint a picture of what a mom-and-pop dialysis center actually entails for you, the listener. Because earlier I was thinking about the evolution of the Indian retail sector.
Okay, yeah.
Like 20 years ago, before the massive organized supermarket chains consolidated the market, everyone bought their groceries from millions of tiny, independent Kirana stores.
Right, the local shops?
Yeah. And if a Kirana store is poorly managed, maybe the rice is a bit stale or they run out of your favorite soap, but if an independent, unorganized dialysis center is poorly managed...
The stakes are fatal.
Exactly.
The risks of an unorganized medical facility are profound. Think about the infrastructure required for safe dialysis. You need reverse osmosis water purification systems running flawlessly.
Right.
If an independent center cuts corners on water filtration, the patient's blood is exposed to heavy metals or bacteria. You need rigorous infection control protocols. If a mom-and-pop clinic doesn't have the capital to invest in top-tier sterilization, you run the risk of an outbreak of hepatitis C or HIV spreading rapidly through the patient pool via cross-contamination.
And they also lack the basic economic levers, right? Like a single clinic owner buying supplies for 5 dialysis machines cannot negotiate with massive global pharmaceutical companies for better prices on imported dialyzers or specialized tubing.
Exactly, they pay a massive premium for their inventory.
Which forces them to either charge the patient exorbitant rates or, more insidiously, cut corners on the clinical quality to maintain their profit margins.
That fragmentation is NephroPlus's true competition. They aren't primarily battling other massive hospital chains for market share. They are battling the chaos of the unorganized sector.
Right.
The core business opportunity is bringing standardized clinical governance, massive bulk purchasing power, and reliable infrastructure to a space that has historically operated without a safety net.
So the thesis is clear.
Yeah.
Consolidate a massive, fragmented life or death market. But executing that thesis introduces a massive contradiction. NephroPlus currently operates 519 clinics.
Yeah.
I cannot fathom the capital expenditure required to buy real estate, construct medical-grade buildings, and purchase thousands of high-tech dialysis machines across multiple countries.
You would be astronomically expensive.
Right. If they attempted to own all of that infrastructure outright, they would have burned through billions of dollars in debt and likely gone bankrupt years ago.
Well, the traditional hospital model of owning the land and the building is incredibly capital intensive. NephroPlus avoided that trap entirely.
Okay.
The genius of their expansion relies on a strictly enforced asset-light business model. They realized from the very beginning that to dominate the dialysis sector, they didn't need to own the bricks and mortar. They just needed to own the clinical protocols and the patient relationship.
Okay, let's break down the actual mechanics of this asset-light approach. How do you operate over 500 clinics if you don't actually build them?
They deploy their operations through 3 distinct channels, or pillars. Let's look at the first one, which they label captive clinics. Based on their financials from the first half of fiscal year 26, this pillar generated 36.51% of their total revenue.
Captive clinics. The term captive always sounds a bit ominous to me, but I imagine it means they are operating within someone else's walled garden.
Exactly. It means they are embedding themselves directly into existing major hospital infrastructure. We are looking at deep partnerships with premier healthcare networks, names like Max Healthcare, Fortis, and Care Hospitals.
Oh, I see. I want to try an analogy here because it reminds me heavily of the tech world.
Go for it.
It's akin to an operating system being installed onto third-party hardware. The massive hospital, let's say Fortis, acts as the hardware. They provide the physical room, the electricity, the specialized plumbing, and the prestige of their brand name.
Right.
And NephroPlus acts as the software and the specialized processing chip. They come in and install the actual dialysis machines, they deploy their own trained clinical technicians, and they run the entire ward using their proprietary protocol.
The operating system analogy is highly accurate. It operates on a revenue share basis. The hospital provides the shell, NephroPlus provides the engine, and they split the revenue generated from the patients. NephroPlus completely bypasses the need to spend millions acquiring land or dealing with municipal zoning boards.
Okay, I have to push back here. Put yourself in the shoes of the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar hospital chain. You have a massive facility, you have access to cheap capital, and you already treat thousands of patients. If the dialysis market is a guaranteed 35,000 core gold mine with a compounding patient base, why on earth would you invite a third-party vendor like NephroPlus into your building to take a cut of the profits?
It's a fair question.
Why wouldn't the hospital simply buy the machines, hire their own nephrologists, and keep 100% of the revenue?
The answer comes down to opportunity cost and the unique, frankly unglamorous nature of dialysis as a medical service. From a hospital administrator's perspective, running a dialysis ward is surprisingly burdensome and economically inefficient compared to other departments.
Inefficient how? The patients are guaranteed to come back 3 times a week. That sounds like a dream for revenue consistency.
It is consistent, yeah, but it is low yield relative to the floor space it consumes. Dialysis patients sit in a chair for up to 4 hours per session. That requires massive, dedicated physical real estate within the hospital.
All right, 4 hours is a long time.
Now, compare the revenue generated by a patient sitting in a dialysis chair for 4 hours versus the revenue generated by utilizing that exact same square footage for an acute neurosurgery theater or a cardiac catheterization lab.
A A brain surgery might bill in the lakhs for a few hours of work, whereas a dialysis session might only bill a couple of thousand rupees.
Yeah.
The hospital wants its premium real estate dedicated to high-margin, acute procedures.
Exactly. Furthermore, running the dialysis ward requires intense, grueling micromanagement. It involves a high volume of specialized, disposable consumables that must be constantly procured.
Yeah, the logistics.
It requires a massive staff of technicians who suffer from high burnout rates. It demands uncompromising infection control for immunocompromised patients who are constantly rotating through the chairs. For a hospital CEO focused on expanding the oncology or cardiology wings, the dialysis ward is a logistical headache that drags down their overall revenue per square foot metrics.
So the pitch from NephroPlus is essentially, look, we know you hate managing this department. We will take the entire logistical nightmare off your plate. We will run it more efficiently than your internal staff ever could. We will eliminate your equipment maintenance headaches, and we will simply wire you a substantial revenue share check every single month for the use of your space.
That's the pitch. And once the hospital signs that contract, NephroPlus begins to construct an incredibly deep competitive moat. Because they don't just roll in machines, they install their proprietary clinical framework, which they call RenaSure.
Right, RenaSure. We see terms like that constantly in corporate healthcare materials. It usually just means they printed out a nice PDF of best practices. How deeply does this actually integrate into the hospital's daily reality?
Oh, it goes far beyond a manual. RenaSure is an exhaustive, standardized clinical governance system. It dictates the exact parameters for reverse osmosis water purification. It standardizes the specific angles for needle insertion to preserve the patient's vascular access over years of treatment.
Wow, even the needle angles.
Yeah. It implements strict, data-driven complication management protocols. Once a hospital allows NephroPlus to install this system, the broader hospital staff, the emergency room doctors, the ward nurses, all become accustomed to interfacing with the NephroPlus technology and the NephroPlus team.
If I'm listening to this and I run a traditional business software company, I'm probably incredibly jealous of this lock-in.
Oh, for sure.
Because unlike a software subscription that a client can cancel with one click if they get annoyed, canceling NephroPlus means the hospital literally has to shut down a life-saving ward.
Yeah.
If Fortis decides they want to kick NephroPlus out after 3 years, they have to source and purchase dozens of new dialysis machines, hire and train an entirely new specialized workforce, build new clinical protocols from scratch, and risk fatal medical errors during the transition.
The switching costs are massive.
They're effectively an invisible electric fence.
The lock-in is profound. And a compounding that advantage is the sheer brutal reality of procurement scale. NephroPlus is currently buying dialysis fluid, imported dialyzer filters, and specialized needles to supply over 500 clinics globally.
Right.
Even the largest standalone hospital chain in India might only be purchasing supplies for 30 or 40 internal dialysis wards.
So the pharmaceutical companies are going to give NephroPlus a massive volume discount that the standalone hospital could never dream of securing.
Precisely. The cost per treatment for NephroPlus is fundamentally lower than what the hospital could achieve internally. So the captive clinic model is a win for the hospital's operational bandwidth and a massive defensible revenue stream for NephroPlus.
That covers the private sector partnerships. What is the second pillar of their asset-light expansion?
The second pillar revolves around government contracts. They operate extensively through public-private partnerships, or PPPs. In the first half of fiscal 26, these PPPs accounted for nearly 31% of their total revenue.
Government contracts in healthcare are notoriously difficult to win and even harder to execute profitably. How does this fit the asset-light model?
Well, it mirrors the hospital strategy, but on a state level. NephroPlus wins massive tenders to provide dialysis services inside government-run state or district hospitals. The government provides the physical space within the public hospital and occasionally provides some baseline equipment, while NephroPlus deploys the staff, the supply chain, and the RenaSure protocols to actually deliver the care.
This makes perfect sense when you look at the pressure on the public health system. State governments are under immense political pressure to provide free or subsidized care to citizens, but the public health bureaucracy simply does not possess the operational agility to maintain high-tech, complex dialysis centers across dozens of rural districts.
No, they really struggle with equipment maintenance and staff absenteeism.
Right. Outsourcing the operations to a hyper-specialized, scaled private player guarantees that the public funds are translating into actual, reliable patient outcomes rather than broken machines gathering dust in a district hospital hallway.
Exactly.
So we have captive clinics in the mega hospitals, and PPPs in the government hospitals. What happens when they want to enter a market where neither of those options exists?
That is where the third pillar comes in, which is the standalone clinics. These are fully owned, traditional retail-style medical centers. NephroPlus leases the commercial real estate, funds the entire physical build-out, and manages every aspect of the facility.
Which, wait, that violates the asset-light philosophy, doesn't it? They have to put up their own capital for these.
It requires a heavier upfront capital expenditure, yes. However, they deploy these standalone units highly selectively. They use them to penetrate specific neighborhoods or cities where a suitable hospital partner doesn't exist, but the patient density is high enough to justify the real estate investment and capture 100% of the profit margin.
Okay, so the business model is built on absolute adaptability. If they need prestige and scale, they partner with Fortis. If they need massive volume and public access, they partner with the state government. If they need to capture a specific, underserved neighborhood, they build it themselves.
The flexibility of the deployment is crucial, but having a flexible blueprint is useless if you build the house in the wrong neighborhood.
Right.
The next layer of their strategy is arguably their most brilliant move, and it involves their geographic mapping.
Yeah, this is the part of the research that forced me to completely reevaluate my understanding of the Indian healthcare market. When most people envision cutting-edge corporate healthcare in India, the image is always the same. You picture massive, glittering, glass and steel hospital towers in the premium zip codes of Tier I metros like Mumbai, Delhi, or Bangalore.
Sure.
You imagine these giants fiercely battling over wealthy urban patients with premium private insurance.
Right, but NephroPlus analyzed that exact same Tier I battlefield and made a calculated decision to focus their firepower somewhere else entirely.
The sources show a staggering geographic bias. A massive 77.35% of all NephroPlus clinics in India are located in Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities.
Yeah.
They practically ignored the traditional corporate battlegrounds to build an empire in the smaller towns and regional hubs.
The strategic rationale behind this becomes obvious when you look at the macroeconomic trends intersecting with the realities of healthcare delivery. India is experiencing rapid, unprecedented urbanization. The populations in these Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities are expanding, their purchasing power is rising, and crucially, their expectation for formal, organized healthcare is increasing.
But the infrastructure hasn't caught up to their expectations.
Historically, if a patient in a Tier 3 town suffered total kidney failure, their options were bleak. They could rely on a questionable, unorganized local clinic that might be reusing unsanitized filters, or they were forced to travel.
And we established earlier that traveling for dialysis is a nightmare. Imagine living in a Tier 3 town and having to endure a 4-hour bus ride to a Tier I city, sit on a machine for 4 hours, and then take a 4-hour bus ride back home.
It's exhausting.
You have to do that 3 times a week while your body is tired and anemic. It's physically impossible to sustain.
So the localized demand in these regional hubs is explosive. The patient needs the care within a few kilometers of their home. But the massive corporate hospital chains, the very partners NephroPlus uses for their captive clinics in the metros, do not have a significant physical footprint in these Tier 3 markets.
Why not? I mean, if the demand is there, why hasn't a massive corporate player built a 500-bed hospital in a Tier 3 town?
Because the unit economics of a multi-specialty mega hospital simply collapse in a Tier 3 environment. You cannot justify the hundreds of millions of rupees required to build advanced neurosurgery and oncology wings in a town where the premium patient volume isn't high enough to keep the beds full.
But the unit economics for a highly specialized 15-bed dialysis clinic.
Those work perfectly. By leveraging their PPP contracts with regional state health departments, or by deploying targeted standalone clinics, NephroPlus can enter these completely underserved markets. They become the primary and frequently the exclusive provider of high-quality, organized care in that region. They are scaling rapidly in blue ocean territories where organized corporate competition is virtually zero.
It's an incredible land grab. But if I put my skeptic's hat back on, this geographical sprawl raises a terrifying operational red flag.
Okay, what is it?
It is one thing to monitor clinical quality when all your doctors are working inside a single massive building in Mumbai where the management team can walk the floor. It is an entirely different beast to guarantee medical safety across hundreds of tiny geographically isolated clinics spread across thousands of miles of rural and semi-urban India. How do you prevent a clinic in a remote district from letting its standards slip?
That is the big question. Quality degradation at the edges of the network is the single greatest threat to any scaled service business. In healthcare, a lapse in quality doesn't just hurt the brand, it results in patient mortality. NephroPlus battles this entropy through aggressive, technology-driven standardization.
We mentioned the RenaSure clinical protocols earlier, but a protocol is just a set of rules. People break rules all the time. How do they actually enforce it?
They remove the human element from the most critical safety checkpoints. The prime example of this is their implementation of a system called Renova.
The sources describe Renova as a cloud-based dialyzer reprocessing system. To the average listener, that sounds like pure tech jargon. What is a dialyzer, and why does the cloud need to be involved in cleaning it?
Okay, so the dialyzer is the core component of the treatment. It is a clear plastic cylinder filled with thousands of microscopic hollow fibers. It acts as the actual artificial kidney. The patient's blood is pumped through these fibers, and the toxic waste is drawn out through microscopic pores.
Okay, so it's a highly sensitive biological filter.
Right. In a perfect world with unlimited resources, a new dialyzer would be used once and thrown away. But they are expensive. To keep the cost of treatment accessible in developing markets, clinical protocols allow for a single dialyzer to be cleaned, sterilized, and reused multiple times, but only for the same specific patient.
Reusing a blood filter sounds incredibly dangerous if the cleaning process isn't flawless.
The risks are severe. If the chemical wash isn't perfectly calibrated, toxic residues remain. If the microscopic fibers are damaged during cleaning, the dialyzer loses its ability to filter the blood effectively, and the patient slowly succumbs to uremia over several weeks without realizing it.
That's terrifying.
In an unorganized mom-and-pop clinic, this reprocessing is often done manually by a technician working over a sink, entirely subject to human fatigue and error.
So how does the Renova Cloud system fix this?
NephroPlus automated the physical cleaning process using advanced machinery at the clinic. But crucially, the validation of that cleaning is controlled by the cloud. When a dialyzer is placed into the cleaning machine in a Tier 3 town, the local machine performs automated pressure tests to check the integrity of the microscopic fibers. It measures the precise chemical volume of the sterilant.
And it sends that data centrally.
Yes, the data is uploaded instantly to the central Renova cloud servers. If the machine in that remote town detects that the fiber integrity has dropped by even a fraction of a percent below the mandated safety threshold, the cloud system digitally flags that specific dialyzer. It locks it out of the inventory system. The local technician physically cannot scan that dialyzer and assign it to a patient for their next session.
That is brilliant. You're using software to physically override human negligence. Even if a tired technician in a rural clinic tries to cut a corner and reuse a degraded filter, the central server simply refuses to allow the treatment to proceed.
They are replacing trust with centralized digital verification. But technology can only solve the hardware problem. You still have to manage the human element. The software can't physically insert the needle into the patient's arm.
Right. If the nurse administering the treatment has poor technique, the patient's vascular access, the actual vein they use for the procedure, will eventually collapse and the patient loses their lifeline. How do you guarantee the skill level of a technician in a town where advanced medical training doesn't exist?
They realized very early on that they could not rely on the open labor market. There simply aren't enough highly trained nephrology technicians existing in Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities to staff hundreds of new clinics. If they wanted a standardized workforce, they had to manufacture it themselves. This led to the creation of the NPDA Academy.
It's basically an internal university specifically for dialysis.
Exactly. NPDA is their proprietary training engine. They recruit individuals with baseline science or nursing backgrounds and put them through an intense, highly specific curriculum. They aren't teaching general nursing. They are teaching the exact step-by-step RenaSure protocols.
Okay, so total uniformity.
Every single technician in the NephroPlus network, regardless of where they are deployed, has learned the exact same method for needle insertion, the exact same emergency response for a sudden drop in blood pressure, and the exact same sanitization routine.
If you are listening to this and trying to extract a broader business lesson, this is the core takeaway regarding scale. Scaling a service business is a massive trap if you think it just means buying more real estate and putting your logo on the door. True scale is the ability to replicate identical outcomes across wildly different environments. NephroPlus can confidently plant a flag in 300 different chaotic regional markets because they aren't relying on the local talent pool or local standards. They're importing their own automated cloud verification and their own factory-trained workforce. Dialysis is simply the physical medium. Absolute standardization is the actual product they are selling.
That is the foundation of the empire. But of course, the operation is only sustainable if the financial architecture can support it.
Which brings us to the economic engine. We understand the asset-light model, we understand the Tier 3 geography, and we understand the standardization. Now we need to look under the hood and ask the ultimate question. How does this massive, highly engineered system actually generate a profit? What are the unit economics of keeping over 500 clinics running and expanding?
To map out the economics, we have to look closely at the financial performance data from their recent filings. The numbers demonstrate a textbook case of massive operating leverage.
Let me lay out the baseline metrics from the sources so we know what we are analyzing. If we look at the first 9 months of fiscal year 26, NephroPlus reported total revenue of 7,332 million rupees. That represents a massive 37% increase year over year.
The revenue number is impressive, but the volume driving it is the key metric. To generate those 7.3 billion rupees, the network served 36,550 consolidated guests.
It's interesting they use hospitality terminology for a medical procedure.
It reflects their attempt to humanize a very clinical process, but strictly from an operational standpoint, those 36,550 patients translated into 2.85 million individual dialysis treatments executed in just 9 months.
Let that number sink in. 2.85 million treatments in 270 days. That means across their network, a NephroPlus technician is initiating a new life-sustaining dialysis session every few seconds. It's an industrial scale of medical delivery. But volume alone doesn't equal profit. How do the economics look on a per session basis?
The revenue per session varies heavily based on the location and the payer. On average, across the entire blended network, they pull in roughly 1,500 to 2,000 rupees per session.
That seems surprisingly low for a highly complex medical procedure.
It is low. If you look at purely private, premium organized setups in Tier 1 cities, the out-of-pocket or insurance-backed rates can easily reach 2,000 to 3,000 rupees, sometimes much more. But remember, NephroPlus has deliberately heavily weighted its portfolio toward government PPP contracts and Tier 2 and 3rd standalone clinics,
where the pricing power is structurally limited by government reimbursement caps or lower regional purchasing power.
Correct. Their blended average is pulled down by their strategic focus on the masses. The genius of their financial model isn't reliant on charging exorbitant premium prices. Their profitability is entirely dependent on how their internal costs behave as their massive volume increases. This brings us to the concept of operating leverage.
Walk me through the microeconomics of a single clinic. Let's say I open a brand new NephroPlus standalone center in a Tier 2 city. How do my costs break down?
Your costs are split into 2 distinct categories: fixed costs and variable costs. The fixed costs to open that clinic are substantial. The sources indicate that setting up a new center requires a capital expenditure of roughly 10 to 16 million rupees.
Right, the build-out.
Once the doors are open, you have massive fixed operational costs every single month: the commercial lease for the real estate, the salaries for the nephrologists, the NPIDIA-trained nurses, and the security staff, plus the massive electricity bills to run the reverse osmosis machines and the IT infrastructure connecting to the Renova cloud.
And the crucial point about fixed costs is that they are entirely indifferent to my patient volume. Whether I have 1 patient walk through the door today or 50 patients, I still have to pay the rent and I still have to pay the nurses' salaries.
Exactly. The fixed costs represent a massive, heavy baseline you must overcome. The variable costs, however, are strictly tied to the individual treatment. These are the specific consumables: the imported dialyzer, the sterilized tubing, the specific volume of chemical dialysis fluid, the needles.
So when the clinic first opens, my fixed costs are bleeding me dry because I only have a few patients.
But as your marketing kicks in and as the local hospital starts referring patients to you, your volume climbs. Because a dialysis patient must return 3 to 4 times a week, every new patient acquired represents over 150 guaranteed sessions per year.
The volume skyrockets incredibly quickly.
And as that volume pushes upward, your fixed costs remain relatively flat. The rent doesn't increase just because the chairs are full. Once a clinic crosses its break-even threshold, the point where the margin on the variable consumables finally covers the fixed monthly overhead, The financial physics of the clinic fundamentally changed.
Every single additional dialysis session booked above that break-even line drops almost entirely to the bottom line as pure profit.
That is the essence of operating leverage. When you apply that leverage across a network, executing 2.85 million treatments, the profitability scales exponentially. We see this explicitly in their EBITDA margins, which basically measures their core operational profitability.
Right.
In fiscal year 23, their EBITDA margin was sitting at 11.1%. By the first half of fiscal year 26, that margin had more than doubled, reaching 23.3%.
They doubled their operational profit margin in 3 years without doubling their prices. They did it entirely through the sheer, brutal efficiency of pushing massive volume through standardized infrastructure. It is a beautiful financial engine.
It is highly effective. But if you analyze their historical financials, the journey wasn't a perfectly smooth, uninterrupted upward trajectory. There are specific periods of intentional financial compression that reveal how management thinks about long-term growth.
Yeah, I noticed that anomaly in the sources. In fiscal year 25, the company actually reported a noticeable dip in their net profit, despite the fact that their top-line revenue was still growing. Normally, if I see a company growing its sales but its profits are actively shrinking, I assume the business model is breaking. I assume their costs are spiraling out of control, or they're aggressively slashing prices to artificially buy market share.
In many companies, that would be the correct assumption. But the profit dip in fiscal 25 wasn't an operational failure. It was the mathematical consequence of a calculated strategic phase known as a J-curve.
A J-curve. I've seen that term thrown around. How does it apply to building medical clinics?
Well, a J-curve describes the temporary negative financial impact of massive upfront investment before the long-term revenue from that investment materializes. During fiscal year 25, NephroPlus initiated a highly aggressive expansion of their hub-and-spoke model. The sources note they committed to a massive 250-bed capacity expansion.
Right.
They were building out large regional hub facilities designed to support the smaller spoke clinics in surrounding areas.
So they were pouring hundreds of millions of rupees into pouring concrete, importing fleets of new dialysis machines, and hiring management teams for massive new facilities that hadn't even opened their doors yet.
Exactly. When a company builds capacity that rapidly, their accounting expenses spike immediately. They have massive cash outflows for the build, and crucially, they begin taking heavy depreciation hits on their income statement for all that newly acquired medical equipment.
But the revenue side of the equation is lagging. Even if you open a beautiful new 50-bed hub clinic today, you don't magically have 50 patients walking through the door tomorrow. It takes months, sometimes a year, to establish the referral networks, migrate patients from unorganized centers, and bring that massive new facility up to maximum utilization.
Right. And the bottom of the J is that painful valley where you have already incurred the massive fixed costs and the depreciation. Your profit margins look terrible, but the future revenue hasn't caught up. The magic happens when the utilization finally ramps up.
Once those 250 new beds fill up with patients needing treatment 3 times a week, that massive operating leverage we just talked about kicks in violently. The revenue explodes, the fixed costs are easily absorbed, and the curve of the J sweeps sharply upward, driving the massive 37% revenue growth and the doubled profit margins we saw in the very next year.
They intentionally absorbed a massive hit to their short-term profitability in fiscal year 25 because they knew the capacity they were building would generate an exponential return in fiscal 26. It is a classic move of taking one step back to take 3 giant leaps forward.
And it is vital to note that the broader financial markets completely understand and reward this aggressive strategy. We aren't going to get bogged down in deep financial mechanics here, but the sources point out that the market values NephroPlus between 5,457 to 5,666 crore rupees, and they are trading at a high PE ratio of roughly 59.
Right.
Whatever that specific multiple implies about the mechanics of the stock, the core takeaway is clear. The market isn't looking at their past profit dips. The market believes deeply in the future trajectory of that J-curve. They are pricing in the company's ability to continuously replicate this highly profitable asset-light volume machine.
Which naturally leads to the most critical strategic question for the executive board. If you have built this incredible profit engine, and you already control 50% of the organized Indian market, and you are already pushing deep into the Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities,
where do you find the next massive wave of growth?
Exactly. You cannot simply stay in India forever if you want to maintain a breakneck growth rate.
The ceiling eventually approaches. Which brings us to the most fascinating pivot in the entire NephroPlus story. They didn't just look for new cities, they looked across the ocean. They realized that the operational muscle they forged in the fires of the Indian market, the asset-light scaling, the Impedia training, the Renova cloud verification, was highly exportable.
The data showing their transition from a domestic Indian operator into a global healthcare player is genuinely stunning. A few years ago, international revenue was a mere side project. In fiscal year 23, international operations generated just 12% of their total revenue.
But by the first 9 months of fiscal year 26, that international contribution skyrocketed. It now accounts for a massive 41% of their total revenue. They nearly quadrupled the proportional weight of their international business in a fraction of a decade. Where exactly are they planting these flags?
They are executing a highly targeted expansion into 3 specific markets: Nepal, Uzbekistan, and most prominently, the Philippines. The Philippines has become their primary international battleground. They currently operate 41 clinics in that country alone.
But let's clarify how they built that footprint in the Philippines. Because building 41 medical clinics from scratch in a foreign country, dealing with foreign zoning laws, foreign health ministries, and foreign construction contractors would take a decade.
Oh, they bypassed organic growth entirely. The sources highlight that NephroPlus executed 18 separate acquisitions to establish that 41 clinic network in the Philippines. They aggressively utilized mergers and acquisitions, M&A, to buy their way into immediate scaled market share.
I want to pause and dig into the reality of that, because buying 18 different companies sounds great on a spreadsheet. But the operational reality of M&A in healthcare is a nightmare. You are buying 18 independent, unorganized clinics. That means you are inheriting 18 different broken corporate cultures, 18 different messy inventory systems, and staff who are used to doing things their own way. How do they actually integrate these acquisitions without the whole thing collapsing?
The integration phase is brutal. When NephroPlus acquires a clinic in Manila, they don't just change the sign on the door. They systematically rip out the legacy infrastructure. They replace the local inventory systems with their centralized procurement. They rip out the manual cleaning sinks and install the Renova cloud-connected machines.
And the human element.
That is the most difficult part. They have to retrain the legacy Filipino staff on the strict RENAssure protocols. If a veteran nurse who has worked there for 10 years refuses to adapt to the new standardized needle insertion techniques or the new cloud verification steps, NephroPlus has to manage that friction, often resulting in staff turnover, to ensure the global standardization remains unbroken. They are essentially executing corporate turnarounds on a microscale 18 times over.
Okay, but why choose the Philippines and Uzbekistan? Why not expand into Europe or Australia?
Because they are targeting markets whose current healthcare landscapes closely resemble where the Indian market was 10 years ago. These countries are experiencing surging rates of diabetes and chronic kidney disease, but their dialysis sectors remain heavily fragmented, unorganized, and starved for standardized clinical governance. NephroPlus knows exactly how to consolidate this specific type of chaos because they wrote the playbook in India.
But there is a much deeper, purely economic motive driving this global expansion, isn't there? It's not simply about finding new patients who need care. It's about a massive structural flaw in the global healthcare economy.
Absolutely. The strategic genius of their international push relies entirely on global pricing arbitrage.
Let's unpack the mechanics of this arbitrage. How does this actually generate outsized profits?
To understand the arbitrage, you must look at the global total addressable market for dialysis, which is roughly estimated at $100 billion. Now, recall the environment where NephroPlus learned how to operate. The Indian healthcare market is hyper-competitive and intensely price-sensitive. To survive and achieve a 23% profit margin while charging an average of only 1,500 to 2,000 rupees per session, NephroPlus was forced to become the most ruthlessly efficient, lean, tech-enabled dialysis operator on the planet.
They essentially trained with heavy weights on their ankles. They squeezed every possible inefficiency out of their supply chain and their labor models just to survive the low-price environment of Tier 3 India.
Precisely. Now take that hyper-efficient, highly disciplined operational engine and export it to a foreign market where the standard accepted price for a dialysis session is significantly higher.
The cost to actually deliver the care, the cost of the imported dialyzers bought in massive bulk, the automated cloud software remains relatively low because of their global scale. But the revenue they collect from the foreign patient or the foreign insurance company jumps drastically.
The margin widens instantly, and this is exactly why the sources indicate they are aggressively targeting future expansion into premium markets like Saudi Arabia. The data suggests that the accepted pricing for a single dialysis session in Saudi Arabia can be 3 to 13.6 times higher than the baseline price in India.
That multiplier is staggering. If you take a business model that is already spinning off a highly respectable 23% profit margin in India, and you parachute that exact same efficient model into Riyadh, where you can charge 5 or 10 times as much for the exact same medical procedure.
The profit margins don't just increase, the entire financial profile of the corporation transforms.
Wow.
It is a masterclass in global margin expansion. Management has publicly stated a goal of reaching a 50% international revenue mix within the next 12 to 18 months. If they achieve that equilibrium, NephroPlus fundamentally ceases to be an Indian healthcare company. It evolves into a highly lucrative global arbitrage, machine-utilizing, developing world operational efficiency to capture premium market profit margins.
Okay, I have to stop the celebration here. I am thoroughly sold on the brilliance of the model. The asset-light scaling, the cloud standardization, the massive operating leverage, the global arbitrage. It sounds like an unstoppable, invincible corporate machine.
Yeah.
But if you listen to this show, you know there is always a but.
Right, there's always a catch.
No business model operates in a vacuum, and no machine is invincible. We have to ask the hard questions. What happens when this massive system hits reality? Where are the cracks in the armor? What are the existential threats that could derail NephroPlus?
It is vital to analyze the downside because the very mechanisms that fueled their explosive growth have inherently created massive, unique vulnerabilities. Let's begin by examining their heavy reliance on the government.
Right, the public-private partnership model.
Yeah.
We've spent 20 minutes praising it as a brilliant way to scale across regional India without burning capital.
It is capital efficient, but relying on government tenders is a massive double-edged sword. As we noted, these PPP contracts represent nearly 31% of their entire revenue stream. That is a critical chunk of their business that is entirely dependent on the whims of politicians and bureaucrats.
And if there is one constant in emerging markets, it is that government policy can shift overnight.
Exactly the threat. What happens if a newly elected state administration runs on a populist platform and decides to entirely nationalize regional healthcare, terminating all private vendor contracts? Or, more likely, what happens during the next bidding cycle for a major state tender and a hyper-aggressive, local, unorganized player submits a bid that drastically undercuts NephroPlus on price?
If the government bureaucrat evaluating the tender only cares about the lowest immediate cost and ignores the long-term clinical quality differences, NephroPlus could lose the contract. And if they lose a massive statewide tender, that revenue vanishes immediately. But their fixed costs, the regional management hubs they built, the specialized supply chain infrastructure, those costs remain firmly in place. Losing a massive PPP contract would violently crush their regional profit margins.
It is a profound concentration risk. They are insulated to some degree by their operational track record. Smart governments prefer reliable execution over cheap promises, but the stroke of a health minister's pen remains a constant looming threat over a third of their business.
Okay, that is the political risk. Let's talk about the operational risk, because honestly, this is the specific statistic from the sources that jumped off the page and slapped me in the face. The talent squeeze.
Yeah, the human capital element is undeniably their most fragile link.
The sources cite a genuinely staggering number. In fiscal year 25, NephroPlus experienced a 53.05% attrition rate among their healthcare professionals.
Yes, it's wild.
I want to push back aggressively on the entire corporate narrative right here. We spent this entire deep dive praising their RenaSure protocols, their MPD Academy, and their perfect cloud-verified quality. How on earth can a company claim to deliver flawlessly standardized, life-sustaining medical care when literally more than half of the people actually inserting the needles into the patient's arms are quitting every single year? If your workforce is a revolving door, institutional memory is zero.
It is an incredibly valid, harsh critique, and it represents a massive daily operational crisis for clinic managers. The reality they're fighting is a severe systemic global shortage of skilled nephrologists and trained dialysis nurses.
And let's be honest about the job itself. Working a 12-hour shift in a dialysis clinic is grueling. It is high-stress, emotionally draining work dealing with chronically ill, often depressed patients, and the baseline pay for a medical technician is rarely lucrative.
Which creates a vicious cycle of poaching. Because NephroPlus built the NPIDIA Academy, they are actively taking untrained workers and molding them into highly skilled, protocol-driven technicians. The moment that technician receives their certification, their market value skyrockets.
A massive corporate hospital in Delhi or a premium clinic in Dubai can look at a NephroPlus technician, know they have been perfectly trained, and swoop in with an offer for a 30% pay bump.
And the technician leaves. NephroPlus is essentially forced to act as a massive free training university for the entire global dialysis industry.
So the NPIDIA Academy isn't just a clever strategic advantage. It is a desperate, exhausted necessity just to tread water. They have to keep the academy running at maximum capacity just to replace the 53% of the workforce bleeding out the back door. If that training pipeline ever slows down, the clinics become understaffed, the quality of care immediately plummets, patient outcomes suffer, and the reputation of the entire network collapses.
The cloud software and the strict protocols act as a buffer against the constant churn, ensuring the new hires don't make fatal errors. But no amount of software can replace the nuanced, empathetic skill of a veteran nurse who knows a patient's specific vascular quirks. The attrition rate is a fire they have to fight every single day.
All right, we have government whims and a collapsing workforce. What is the third major risk? Let's look further down the timeline.
The third risk is existential. It involves long-term technological disruption that could render their entire business model obsolete. We are looking at the potential death of the clinic-based model itself.
Obsolescence. We just established the patient base is compounding at 10% a year. The disease isn't going away.
The disease isn't going away, but where the treatment occurs might radically shift. Think about the massive influx of venture capital and R&D currently pouring into medical technology. Companies are aggressively developing advanced home dialysis solutions and FDA-approved portable, wearable artificial kidneys.
Wearable. You mean a patient could theoretically strap a device around their waist like a bulky belt, and it continuously filters their blood while they walk around their house or go to work.
Exactly. Or look at companies like Outset Medical, who are pushing the boundaries of making full-scale dialysis machines smaller, highly intuitive, and capable of being safely operated by the patient themselves in their own living room without needing a trained technician present.
Oh, wow. If the standard of care for end-stage renal disease actually shifts from an industrial medical center into the decentralized comfort of the patient's home.
The implications for NephroPlus are terrifying.
Right. Their massive, hard-fought network of 519 physical clinics suddenly flips from being an impenetrable asset to a massive liability. They would be left holding hundreds of commercial leases and massive clinic infrastructure that patients no longer need to visit.
It is the ultimate innovator's dilemma. NephroPlus has spent 15 years becoming the absolute master of the centralized, clinic-based model. If the technological paradigm shifts to at-home care, they will be forced to execute a terrifyingly complex pivot. They would have to transform from being a physical clinic operator into becoming a decentralized logistics company, delivering heavy fluid bags to thousands of individual homes, and a remote monitoring software provider.
And as we know, pivoting the operational focus of a 500-location corporation while maintaining profitability is incredibly difficult.
Right. Finally, there is a fourth risk, and this one is an immediate daily mathematical threat. Reimbursement caps colliding with inflation. We discussed the massive government schemes like PMJAY, which are designed to expand healthcare access to the poorest populations.
Which is a noble and necessary public health initiative.
It is necessary, but the government enforces strict price controls. Currently, schemes like PMJAY cap the amount they will reimburse a provider at roughly 1,200 to 1,500 rupees per dialysis session.
Which, as we noted earlier, sits at the absolute rock bottom of NephroPlus's average revenue curve.
The danger here is macroeconomic inflation. Every input cost NephroPlus has is subject to inflation. The cost of the imported dialyzers rises with currency fluctuations. The cost of specialized medical-grade tubing increases. The cost of the massive amounts of electricity required to run the reverse osmosis machines surges. And crucially, to fight that 53% attrition rate, they constantly have to raise the salaries of their technicians.
All their operational costs are pushing upward. But if the government bureaucracy refuses to adjust the 1,200 rupee reimbursement cap to match that inflation,
then NephroPlus's margins are violently crushed in a vice. They legally cannot pass the rising costs onto the PMJY patient. If the inflation of their medical supply chain outpaces the efficiency gains they can squeeze out of their scale, those celebrated 23% profit margins could evaporate.
So if you're an investor or an executive, you're looking at an empire built on a fault line. To navigate these intense, constant risks, the sudden loss of government tenders, the nightmare of replacing half your staff every year, the looming threat of wearable tech and margin-crushing inflation, you cannot rely on autopilot. You need a captain steering the ship who possesses a very specific type of operational paranoia and strategic discipline. Which brings us to the architects at the helm, who actually built this machine.
The primary driving force and the architect of the model is Vikram Vrupala, the founder, chairman, and managing director of NephroPlus.
Looking at his background in the source material, it clarifies so much about the company's DNA. He doesn't have the typical profile of a passionate local doctor who slowly, organically grew a single clinic into a hospital. He comes from the hardcore, unforgiving world of elite corporate strategy.
His background is heavily rooted in management consulting. He spent over 21 years in healthcare strategy, including significant formative stints at top-tier firms like McKinsey & Company and ZS Associates before founding NephroPlus back in 2009.
That McKinsey background is the skeleton key to understanding the entire business. The relentless, almost obsessive focus on standardization, the creation of the RenaSure protocols to eliminate human variants, the NPD Academy to manufacture labor, the asset-light strategy to bypass capital constraints. These aren't traditional medical practices. These are classic, high-level management consulting frameworks applied directly to a messy, chaotic, real-world biological problem.
He essentially looked at a medical crisis and treated it as a supply chain and logistics optimization puzzle. He took the business from a single conceptual clinic in 2010 to a multinational network of 519 clinics today. Navigating that scale requires ruthless execution, and you see that discipline most clearly in how the board handles capital allocation.
Let's talk about the money management, because corporate history is littered with fast-growing companies that conquered a market, got arrogant, drowned themselves in massive debt to fund vanity expansions, and subsequently collapsed.
NephroPlus has actively avoided that trap. They have been highly aggressive. Executing 18 international acquisitions is not a conservative move, but they have managed this expansion while maintaining a surprisingly robust balance sheet. The sources indicate that as of March 2025, they were actually operating with a net cash position of negative 84 crore rupees.
Meaning they hold more actual cash on their balance sheet than they hold in debt obligations. Achieving a net cash position while simultaneously buying dozens of clinics across the Philippines and Uzbekistan is incredibly rare.
It is a direct testament to the cash-generating power of the asset-light, high-leverage model we broke down earlier. The mature clinics spin off enough free operating cash flow to organically fund the next wave of capital expenditure.
And it helps that they're heavily backed by massive institutional players.
The presence of top-tier private equity backers, specifically firms like Investcorp and Bessemer, provides two distinct advantages. First, it provides a massive war chest of capital should they need to execute a truly massive transformative acquisition. Second, it enforces rigorous, unsentimental institutional oversight.
The board isn't going to let the CEO buy a corporate jet or pay out massive premature dividends to the founders.
The board mandates that every available rupee of free cash flow is ruthlessly reinvested back into the engine to compound growth, acquire new clinics, and capture global market share.
For you listening, if you study corporate leadership or organizational capability, NephroPlus provides a textbook example of a highly difficult transition. It is incredibly rare for a founder to successfully transition from being the scrappy, hands-on operator of a single startup clinic in 2010 to acting as the chairman of a multinational corporate board, managing complex cross-border M&A, and navigating demands from global institutional investors in 2025. Vrupal has managed that leadership evolution.
The success of that transition relies on building resilient, automated systems rather than relying indefinitely on the sheer entrepreneurial willpower of the founder.
All right, we have covered an immense amount of ground today. Let's try to synthesize this deep dive. We started by confronting a brutal, fragmented reality. Hundreds of thousands of people absolutely tethered to a medical necessity, relying on a chaotic landscape of unorganized, frequently unsafe standalone clinics just to survive the week.
We analyzed how NephroPlus looked at that massive fragmentation and applied a highly standardized, asset-light operational playbook to consolidate it. They convinced major hospitals to surrender their floor space, they convinced governments to outsource their public health mandates, and they built an empire entirely uncontested in the underserved Tier 2 and Tier 3 heartlands of India.
They endure the massive financial pain of a J-curve capacity expansion to unlock exponential operating leverage and 23% profit margins. And then, Realizing the sheer undeniable power of their own operational efficiency, they exported that entire machine to the Philippines and Uzbekistan to capture massive global pricing arbitrage. They built the largest dialysis network in Asia, not by inventing a miraculous new medical procedure, but by utterly mastering the brutal logistics of delivering an existing one.
The broader relevance for all of us, whether you operate in healthcare or software or manufacturing, is that NephroPlus provides a clear window into the future of the global healthcare economy. We are slowly moving away from the era of the massive, generalized, multi-specialty hospital that attempts to do absolutely everything under one single roof. The future of chronic care belongs to these hyper-specialized, incredibly efficient outsourced operators who can manage complex logistics significantly better, cheaper, and safer than a generalist administrator ever could.
Which leaves us with a fascinating and perhaps slightly unsettling final thought to ponder. We started this deep dive by picturing the vulnerable patient, hooked to a machine, reliant on the physical space of the clinic. But as we look at the rise of dominant specialized vendors like NephroPlus taking over specific wards, and as we look at the looming horizon of decentralized wearable medical technology.
The very definition of what constitutes a hospital begins to fracture.
Exactly. The physical architecture of medicine is changing. I want you to think about the massive, prestigious hospital in the center of your city. 10 or 20 years from now, will that massive glass and seal building still be a cohesive institution where holistic medicine is practiced by a unified team? Or will the hospital simply evolve into a high-end real estate landlord, a hollow shell building that merely hosts a collection of highly efficient, globally standardized, hyper-specialized microclinics, all operated by completely different outsourced corporate conglomerates? Will the future of medicine be about treating the patient or simply managing the protocols? Something to mull over until next time.